Hi YouTube, it's me complaining again. I'm probably going to fail as a YouTuber simply because I take negative feedback to heart too much, I guess. So I made a video. The last video was with an ex-feminist, and I spoke a lot about intersectionality, and that video got a lot of downvotes. I'm going to insert a clip from the video here so that you can in case you haven't seen the video, so you get an idea of what it was about.
Yeah, and it's so much more nuanced. There's so many layers. There's just more to it. We can't just be.
Yeah, I can't. Yeah, it's so much more nuanced. Disadvantage in life is complex. It is. It
Yeah,
cannot. For each person, it's going to be different. The things that disadvantage me, whether or not I am disabled or I'm not disabled, but whether or not I am this or that or whatever, you're not going to be able to tell what is my. What are the things that most disadvantage me.
exactly, because there are certain um I have a lot of black friends, and
Mhm,
to some of them, they have experienced some really shitty, like, racist events or
mhm,
in their life. And
mhm,
then some of them haven't experienced maybe but one or two small things.
mhm,
So you can't, so for what one person has been,
mhm.
something that they
And
have
it
struggled
might
with
be,
a lot.
like they also include trauma, like rape and stuff like this. Like you're not going to be able to tell the impact of this or that. It might be what disadvantage you most might be that you had a mother who was on drugs, right? Who knows? Like this is not
That's a
something.
big one. That's a
Yeah,
big one.
this
Absolutely.
might
And you
be
will never see that. You will never, from looking at a person, you will never know, oh, their mother was on drugs and was like abandoning or neglectful.
right.
You can never tell from looking at a person. And that's probably one of one of the worst things that can happen to somebody
Hmm.
is to have a neglectful
Exactly. And in
um
our society today, one of the worst, I mean, not just in our society, but let's say globally in our world, quite a big disadvantage would be wealth. Um, what can we do about that? What are we going to do? Yes, I agree that we can look at these things, but I'm just saying it is not so easy to deal with these problems and just going around in groups and saying you talk first, you have more importance, you're the ultimate victim because you this is just no, it
and
doesn't.
then you can, if you let it define you, then how will you ever overcome it? You know, if it becomes your identity, then you're
But
never
I think
allowed to
even
change your
I
identity.
think it becomes more of your identity when that happens, when people focus on it and
Exactly.
thing, it becomes more.
Exactly.
Because I feel like you can be a black person and just be okay with being black, and that's it. I mean, I have experienced racism in my life a few times. Today I actually I was speaking to some people and we spoke about that. So I recall the times when I've experienced racism. Yeah, but I don't think it needs to define you. I think it's just a thing. It just as sometimes it depends. I mean, it depends on how you experience things or whatever. Maybe for some people it would be a big problem, but for others it wouldn't. You know,
Yeah, there's a
it depends
woman.
on
Oh,
when
what
it
is her
happens, I
name?
guess, or how it happens, or I don't know.
Yeah,
You know,
there's a woman, and I cannot remember her name right now, but she wrote a book, and she's talking about a lot about all these different groups of people who have been through all kinds of trauma.
hmm,
And what the studies are showing is that just because you had the trauma, one example was like child abuse,
right.
that was less a predictor of the outcome as to how the person thought about what they went through and how they
Right.
dealt with it, and
Yeah.
whether they decided it became part of who they are. Oh, I'm
Right.
a victim of child abuse,
Yes.
and carry
I
that their whole
that's
life.
what I think as well. Because I mean, I was gonna say something about sexual assault, but I felt bad. I mean, sexual assault is awful, terrible, bad, but it it is going to affect different people in different ways, and although it's terrible and bad, and we have to deal with it, and you need therapy, and all these things have to happen. I agree, right? But when you enter a group of people that tells you you being raped is I'm going to reward you by calling you a victim and letting you
Hmm.
speak and giving you privileges above other people just because you have had the disadvantage of being raped, then that trauma becomes a bigger part of you than it was. And I
That's what
am
the.
not sure
Mhm.
it needs to be. And it's similar with race. I am not sure that race needs to be as big a part of somebody as people
As we're
make it
making
out
it,
to
and
be.
yeah,
It doesn't need to be that big a part of somebody. And sexual abuse, it will always be a part of you. I understand this, da, da, da. But you don't need to like focus on it so much and like be in groups. But you do in a constructive way, maybe with a therapist alone, in in this
yeah,
way, but not in this public way of, oh my gosh, this makes me a victim and
and
therefore I
on and on
deserve.
and on.
Yeah.
That's what I was the same lady I was just talking about. She one of the studies she mentioned was they studied people who went to like cancer survivor groups and sexual assault survivor groups and a couple other ones I don't remember. But the people who went to the groups, um, on average, were worse off. They were more depressed. They
Yeah.
were, because they had continued to dwell in that
Focus
instead
on
of
it.
kind
Yeah.
of trying to move on from it.
Right, and
I mean,
I think that is really happening with race. I can think because I think race can be just a it can be something very small. Yes, yes, society might sometimes discriminate against you, but half the time you're not even gonna know. How are you gonna know somebody's discriminating against you? You're not gonna know.
right.
So it may not even affect your world. Just
I
but
agree.
focusing on it so much and like this sort of weird cult groups things that I have seen, weird. Weird. So yeah, in that video I got a lot of downvotes. It could be from feminist, and if it is, then that's great, okay. But a part of me is, kind of worried or panicked or whatever if I actually hurt people, or if the downvotes are from people who feel hurt because they belong to marginalized groups, and it can be that it feels as if I've dismissed their struggle. And I also don't know if like people who downvote the video are like black, or it's based on race that people feel, because I know I also have seen it before. You always feel like if somebody like downplays the struggle of race and they are that race, it can hurt. Or I guess it's the same, maybe men can relate if somebody who's a man downplays the struggle of being a man, like a male feminist or whatever, it can hurt because it's like they should know better. So I wanted to make this video to say that I understand that race is a very complex issue, and that to live in as a racial minority or in a world where your race is not like centered and stuff is difficult, and that it affects you in terms of mentally and how you grow up, and how you perceive yourself and your inner voice and all of these things. Like, I understand that race is completely complex, and I did not mean to minimize the effects of race that I mean the effects of race on you psychologically and as a person. I also wanted to speak a lot about like nuance, because I have the feeling that what is missing from all of these discussions is like the concept of nuance, and the idea that actually like we can explore something like this, like intersectionality, from in a deep way. Like, we can explore it on the one side why it doesn't make sense, and we can also explore parts that why it makes sense. And that in general, like with all these discussions around feminism and feminists and stuff, we have to be careful not to like categorize each other, and even like just say, okay, you're a feminist, you're non-feminist, you're right, you're left, or whatever. Like these labels and categorizations, when they're too strong, are not useful anymore, because we all are going to have thoughts that come from the left or the right, or this place or that place, and stuff like this. And that's just a part of humanity. We cannot all just be on one side. Our brains don't work like that. And the truth of the matter is always a lot more complex. It's always that you can make sense of the arguments on the extreme right, and you can make sense of the arguments on the left, extreme left as well. All these arguments can be made to make sense, but what you have to ask yourself is, if you're on one side or the next, is how you could like be open-minded enough to hear the other side and try and genuinely understand what they're trying to say. And that sort of like nuance is important to like understand, that if I'm saying something that is very right or very left or whatever, please remember that I usually am a person who can also see the other side, and I try to do that. I try to, if I have a strong opinion, I try to explore the other side to see if it can make sense. And I think it's important that everybody tries to do that. And so please keep that in mind, that I'm not an extremist on either side. So basically, on intersectionality, I want to go it over and say my thoughts so that if anybody was hurt, hopefully they would be less hurt. And the thing is with me and intersectionality is that, like, I understand intersectionality. I understand that different groups have different privileges and different groups have different disadvantages. And I could agree with that point, that it is easier to be this, to be that, to be whatever. You know, if you had to choose to be this or that at a certain point in history, if I go back 100 years ago and I have to choose between white or black, I'm not going to choose to be black. If I go to certain different times, you're going to choose certain things. So privilege and disadvantage does exist according to different groups in society. So, and that basically is what intersectionality says. Basically, I agree with that. I understand it, that, and I don't want to minimize the struggle that any group faces. I agree that you all face struggles, and I agree that more normal groups tend to face advantages in society. If you're heterosexual, you have the advantage of seeing yourself on TV when you're young and stuff, and it's easier for you to explore your sexuality and go on with life, right? I agree with all those things. It's just that while that is true, when feminists take it too far, when they take it too far to the point where we cannot observe the individuality of the person, like on an individual level, then it becomes a problem, because each person is an individual before they are whatever groups they belong to. You could belong to all the right groups, but something else could have gone wrong in your life that totally affected you in a wrong way. And there's no way to tell what affects what, as I said before, individual and so on and so on. The other major point that I have is that if we're going to be so liberal with these groupings to let women in, to say that women are disadvantaged and they are an intersectional group that is somehow disadvantaged, I don't see how we don't also let men in, because I think the disadvantage is equal there, or even worse for the men, sorry. But so I would think if women are a disadvantaged group, then men are also a disadvantaged group, and we should feel sorry for men for having to face the things that society throws at men in terms of responsibility and not being empathetic towards men, and so on and so on and so on. So I just wanted to make sure to be clear that I don't see intersectionality as nonsense. I do acknowledge the struggle of different groups. I just tend to think that it's a bit more complex than extreme feminists, not extreme, than feminists in general make it out to be, because I've seen them in groups be very extreme about it. And I think we have to keep that complexity in mind, that everybody is different, and we cannot, I don't want to see society reduced to a place where we're just judging people based on random things, like you've been raped, oh, I feel so bad for you, and then we judge them, and we judge their whole situation in life. You're a black person, I'm going to judge you and feel sorry. You're a white person, I'm going to judge you and think that you don't have any struggles. We have to avoid judging individuals, because everybody is an individual first, and what has happened in a person's life comes first. Beyond that, please note that I didn't mean to hurt anybody with the video. I don't want to hurt anybody, any groups, and I do not minimize the struggles that different groups face. And in terms of race, if it was race that gave me all the downvotes, I understand that race is an issue in it depends on the society that you live in, and I understand that in many societies where your race is not centered, you have uh, problems. I get that. I didn't want to minimize that, and I'm sorry if I did.